All right, today we're going to do World War One, what was called when it was over the war to end all wars, because they thought this was going to be the end of war. They thought there'd never be another war like this. Well, sadly, they were very, very, very wrong. But let's talk about World War One. The United States is basically sitting around in the early 1900s, taking care of their own problems, ignoring the rest of the world, doing their own thing, as Americans tend to do. As George Washington said, stay out of European affairs. So we're staying out of European affairs. We're minding our own business. And then World War I happens. So let's get going. What causes this war, this titanic, horrible war? Number one, it's nationalism and imperialism. You have two competing goals here. You have imperialistic Europe, France, Germany, Britain, Russia, putting together large empires, imperialism, where they're taking over large chunks of Africa and South America and all over the place, even parts of Europe, as they build their empires. And you have nationalism. The people that are being taken over are trying to form their own countries and get away from these empires. So you have competing goals here. You have imperialism, the big countries are taking over the little ones, and you have nationalism. The little countries are trying to break away from these big empires, the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and they're trying to get away from these things and form their own country. So nationalism is building your own nation. You have militarism and an arms race. You have a group of people who believe that the way to strengthen your country is, and the way to show power is by military building, militarism, to build the biggest military possible. And you're going to have a tremendous arms race between Germany and Great Britain as they race to build their empire and build their military to the point where they can project their power. All right? And this arms race is going to have terrible consequences. Last but not least, you have alliances. In Europe, during this time period, you have a lot of uncertainty. As people build their empire, you have little countries allying themselves with big countries to try to protect themselves. They are scared of this new imperialistic nations as these imperial countries try to build their empire. And the little countries are scared of the big countries. And meanwhile, the big countries are scared of each other. So everyone is forming alliances, and this is going to be going to start with something that seems like it really doesn't matter very much, is going to turn into a world war. So, now that we've got the three causes of war, we can pause here and get those down. Let's talk about nationalism and imperialism first. Imperialism is basically the idea that a country can increase its power and wealth by controlling other peoples. The biggest imperial nations at this point are Great Britain, not far behind are France and Germany. Russia's also building an empire. Japan's building an empire. All kinds of people are trying to build these into an imperial power in the 1700s and 1800s. Meanwhile, you have nationalism. There is a feeling of intense pride in one's homeland. People are starting to take pride in their country and trying to build their own country and build their own nation, and this goes directly against imperialism. Because the people that are being taken over, again, are trying to build their own homeland, build their own countries. So you've got the imperial nations fighting against the people that they're taking over. Right during the early 1900s, the Serbs, the Bosnians, the Croats, all along the Balkan Peninsula around Greece, are the ones that are making the most noise. They are trying to break away from the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman empires. And these groups of people are trying to form their own country, and it's these groups of people, the Serbs, the Bosnians, the Croats, are going to be the ones that are going to get us all involved in a war as they try to fight to get away from these imperial countries and form their own country. All right? So, pause here. Here you can take a look at some of the political situation at the time. The Russian Empire, Russia is just huge, and what a huge country. You've got Germany, who has finally developed into a country. Germany was the last of the European countries really to form. There's Germany, France here, Great Britain there. You've got Italy is involved. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, Austria and Hungary are there. They have lost, right leading up to World War I, they have lost Romania and Bulgaria and Serbia. And it's this area, right along in this area, where we're going to get the war started. As more of this area tries to break away from the Austro-Hungarian Empire and from the Ottoman Empire over here, that's where we're going to run into problems. So, one more thing. This starts the war's militarism. The development, the idea that armed forces and their, as a tool of diplomacy, as a measuring stick. I'm stronger than you, I have a bigger military, so therefore you're going to do what I want you to or else, was the general idea. This was really pushed and developed by a guy named Otto von Bismarck. Von Bismarck is the first chancellor of Germany, which is basically the leader of the government underneath of Kaiser Wilhelm, the king. This is his chief minister. And von Bismarck says, as he and Wilhelm build Germany, as they put together modern-day Germany, they say the great questions of the day will be settled by means of, not by means of speeches and majority decisions, but by iron and blood. What he means here is Germany is on a quest to build a big military to get what they want. Okay, that is really going to run into a problem with the British. The British really have a problem with this, because one of the things that the Germans are building is a modern navy, and they're building it in a hurry. And the British are very concerned. The British have controlled the seas since colonial times, and that is how they put their empire together, and that's how they keep their empire together. The British have the biggest navy in the world. And this new German navy, the Germans are building a navy as fast as they can, and the Germans are threatening to take away parts of the British Empire and to challenge the British at the sea. So what do the British do? They start building ships as fast as they can. And it's on. It's an arms race. The British versus the Germans, especially in the naval area, is where this really takes off. Meanwhile, all countries, Russia, Germany, the British, the French, everyone is building up their military. Militarism is the name of the day. Everyone is building up their armies, their navies. They are preparing in case they might have to go to war. And they're kind of scared of each other. They don't want to go to war, but they are scared that somebody might attack, and then all heck breaks loose. So, militarism. Pause here. Last but not least, into this terrible mix of things are alliances. Okay, there are two groups of people. Okay, there are the Allies. They're France, Great Britain, and Russia are the three major players in Europe on the Allied side. These three are tied together because basically they're scared of Germany. That's basically what it amounts to. The French and the British have hated each other forever, but they're tied together now because they're even more scared of the Germans. Russia also kind of scared of the Germans who are on their border. So you have the three countries that are involved. Now, as the war plays out, France and Great Britain will stay together, America will join the Allied side, Russia will leave the Allied side. Communists are going to take and overthrow the Tsar in 1917, and Russia will remove itself from the war. They're not a player at the end of the war, but at the beginning, they are. On the other side, the Central Powers, Germany, leading the charge, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Okay, they're going to bind together to take on the Allies. But the main player here is Germany. Pause here. How does this war begin? Well, the war begins, it doesn't have anything to do with the major players. It doesn't look like. The major players are not involved. There are no Germans shooting at anyone. There are no Englishmen or Frenchmen. That's not how the war starts at all. All starts on June 28th, 1914. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austria-Hungary throne, visits Sarajevo, and there he is shot during a parade by a Serbian nationalist. Serbia has recently won its independence from Austria-Hungary. Serbia wants to add the Bosnians, another group of people there, to Serbia. They want to form a nation with Serbia and Bosnia. Now, the Austria-Hungarian Empire has said, no, you can't. So, what happens here is a Serbian nationalist, somebody who wants a new Serbian state with the Bosnians included, goes and shoots Franz Ferdinand. Well, this really seems like a regional little conflict between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. Well, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, its recently freed state. And they expect this to be a short, brief little excursion. They'll go down there, they'll stomp on Serbia again, they'll take back over Serbia, and everything will be fine. Well, that's not quite how this is going to play. It turns into a domino effect of allies. It's going to set off all kinds of recriminations that are going to come out of this as Serbia asks for help, and then Austria-Hungary is going to ask for help, and then everyone's going to ask for help. So it all starts with something that seems very innocuous, doesn't really seem like it's very important, but it sets off a terrible domino effect. Pause here. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Russia is Serbia's ally. Russia is trying to protect Serbia. It's kind of scared of the Austria-Hungarian Empire, so it steps in to help Serbia. Now, Austria-Hungary has a friend in Germany. Germany steps in to help Austria-Hungary. Germany then declares war on Russia. And here, now you got the big players involved. Okay, Britain and France say, hey, wait a minute, Germany, we're here to help Russia. So they step in. Germany declares war on Britain and France, and etc. It just goes on and on from here, as everyone declares war on everyone across the world. Right, as this spirals out of control, as everyone gets involved. Pause here. This turns into trench warfare. You study this in World II, you should be familiar with it. Trenches, basically what happens is modern technology does not allow fighting like it used to. It used to line up two armies, they used to charge at each other, shoot at each other. Some people got killed, one army took over the field, and everybody kept moving. Well, that's not how this is going to work. Because of the machine gun, because of some new advances in technology, the armies find that they can't just do that anymore. And they find themselves stalemated. And so they dig themselves into trenches. And they occupy positions in these trenches. So quickly, the war starts off where Germany makes a big move, but then they get slowed down and it comes to a stop. And the two sides draw trenches in front of each other and dig down and hold on. Every once in a while, the men jump out of the trenches and try to attack the other enemy's trenches, and nobody goes anywhere. The machine guns, poison gas, we have airplanes and zeppelins involved. It just makes it to the point where you just can't fight the way you used to. There's now artillery involved with long-range guns, and what you have really in this war, as far as the fighting goes, is a group of commanders who are used to fighting like Napoleon used to fight, line up and attack the other guy, with weapons that are far outdate what they can do. They don't know how to fight this war. The leaders of the war are totally in over their head. They are not up on this new technology, and they don't know how to fight against the machine gun or with the machine gun. And what is going to happen is a terrible, terrible slaughter that goes nowhere. Right? So, pause here. The casualties are off the chart. Unheard of amounts of casualties, things that mankind has never seen before. We'll give you one battle. The first battle of the Somme, July 1st, 1916, until about mid-November. The British lose 60,000 men in the first day. I think it was 27,000 men in the first hour, as they send their people to attack head-on against the trenches of the Germans. Final casualties in this battle, over 1.2 million people are going to die. 650,000 Germans, 420,000 British, 200,000 French, all for 7 miles of territory. Nothing. This amounts to nothing. 1.2 million men die for nothing. And this, we're not going to go into a great detail about the whole war and how it unfolds, but this is basically what's going on here. It's a slaughter, and nothing is happening. Okay? The two armies are facing each other, and no one's going anywhere, and millions of people are dying. Pause here. Meanwhile, what are we doing? What's the United States doing? For 3 years, we stay out entirely. We're neutral. We remember the words of Washington. Washington said, stay out of foreign entanglements, and we are staying out of foreign entanglements. We are not getting involved in European wars. That's not what we're going to do. Wilson tells the nation, President Woodrow Wilson tells the nation, we must remain impartial in thoughts as well as in action. This is a hard thing for America to do because you have to remember who's in America. As you look at the two sides, the Allies and the Central Powers, you must realize that America is made up of people from both sides. We have lots of Germans, we have lots of Frenchmen and British people, we have people from both sides and all over the world make up the United States. So Wilson is saying, and it's really hard for America to stay impartial, stay out of this. Try to avoid thinking about this. We're not involved. This is not our war. Let them fight it out. Let them do their thing. There's a strong feeling that we shouldn't get involved in the war. In fact, Wilson runs for re-election in 1916 with the slogan, "He kept us out of the war." So up to 1916, we're still out of the war, and Wilson wins election basically by saying, "I'm going to keep you out of the war. We're not going to get involved in this war." There's strong feeling. Opponents of the war organize into something called the Anti-Imperialist League, and this was some leading citizens of the United States, including Carnegie, Mark Twain, William Jennings Bryan. These are big political players, big economic players, big social figures. The Anti-Imperialist League, the idea that we should stay out of this, is the dominant feeling in the United States in the early years of the war. We're out of this for the first 3 years. We really don't want to get involved. Okay? Paul's here. So why do we get involved? Okay. Well, basically goes like this. Germany's Navy, based highly on U-boats, submarines, a new thing. And Germany's strategy is to starve the British. They blockade the British. Remember, the British live on an island. They blockade the British. They attack any ship that brings the British supplies. And this is something we consider, as America, we consider this violation of freedom of the seas. We think we ought to be able to trade with, even though there's a war going on, we ought to be able to trade with either side. We ought to be able to do whatever we want to with whoever we want to. And we're just not into stopping freedom of the seas. Well, it comes to a head on May 7th, 1915, when a British passenger ship called the Lusitania is sunk by a German U-boat. This passenger ship has over almost 1,200 people on it and 128 Americans on it. Now, we claim, and the British claim, that this was, at the time, just a passenger ship, even a hospital ship, we claimed. What was really going on here, the story that you won't read, at least you didn't read at the time, was we were actually sending arms and things to the British on the Lusitania and other ships. So, really, the Germans probably had some cause for sinking the Lusitania. But to the American public, when it played up in the newspapers, when it showed up in the newspapers of this terrible disaster with 128 Americans in it, people started asking, how can Americans stay out of the war when Americans are dying? This war is starting to drag us into it too. If they're going to attack ships that have Americans on it, when's this going to stop? Now Americans are dying. Maybe we should think about getting involved in this. So the Lusitania starts us on the path of thinking, hey, wait a minute, okay? Maybe we should get involved here. Paul's here. The thing that sets us over the edge, there are also other attacks on ships where more Americans die, but the thing that really pushes us over the edge is something called the Zimmerman Note. Okay? January 1917, there's an intercepted telegram from the German foreign minister to the German ambassador in Mexico. And in this telegram, the German foreign minister is looking to expand the war to North America. Okay? And he wants an alliance between Germany and Mexico, and he is urging Mexico to attack the United States. Well, this is too much. Okay, we can't have this. We intercept this telegram, we decode it, and when we see this is it. Okay, we can't have Mexico lining up against us. That's a direct violation of the Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt Corollary and everything we've ever stood for. We're not going to have Europeans getting involved in affairs in North and South America. That just can't happen. So that's the thing that pushes us over the edge in January 1917, the Zimmerman Note. Paul's here. April 2nd, 1917, Wilson goes to Congress, says we need to declare war against Germany in order that we could make the world safe for democracy. The world must be made safe for democracy, says Wilson. We need to protect democracy. Wilson says at the time, he says, it's a fearful thing to lead this great peaceful people into war, into the most terrible and disastrous of all wars, civilization itself seeming to be in the balance. This is not something we take lightly. Getting us into this war is something that has taken a long time, over 3 years of watching Europe beat up on each other, the European countries beat up on each other, and now we're finally going to go into this, and Wilson goes into it eyes open. This is a horrible, terrible thing that we're getting involved in. A lot of people are going to die, and Wilson knows it. Paul's here.